Dr. Henderson, how is the youth vote defined?
So usually the youth vote is defined based on age, and it's usually defined based on generational cohort. And so sometimes people will talk about 18 to 29-year-olds as the youth vote. But even now here, it's split between those who are, say, 18 to 24, so the post-millennials, versus even the 25 to 29-year-olds as the millennials. And those are really the two age ranges that people use to define who is a youth voter.
Awesome. Who does the youth vote usually favor? Is there a certain party or
Yeah,
candidate?
that's a good question, and it really taps a common perception about younger voters. And a common perception, and it's not exactly a misperception, but it can potentially be misleading, is that younger voters, say 18 to 24-year-old voters, are more favorable towards the Democrats. There's some evidence that that's true right now. The 18 to 24-year-olds who voted in 2008 and 18 to 24-year-olds who voted in 2004 and even 2000 have tended to be a bit more liberal and more supportive of the Democratic candidates. In fact, voting almost two-thirds of those who show up to vote in that age group supporting the Democrats, Gore, Kerry, or Obama in the last three presidential elections. And they also tend to express support for more active government and more support for things like same-sex marriage and less support for repealing health care reform. And even more of all those things among 18, 24-year-olds versus even 25 to 29-year-olds, and definitely more so than 30-year-olds and older. But it's not necessarily the case that it's always that way. That's been the way how it's been for the past decade or so. And obviously the folks that were 18 to 24 in 2000 aren't the same folks who were 18 to 24 in 2008, but there's a lot of similarities. But if you go back in time and look at, say, in the 80s, the 18 to 20, the folks who were 18 to 24-year-olds in the 1980, 84, and 88 elections were much less supportive of the Democrats. They were much more enamored with Ronald Reagan, and they tended to vote only about 40% of their votes went to the Democrats. So it's not always the case that the younger voters are more supportive of Democrats, but nationally, that is the case right now.
You mentioned how it's a big impact. Is it a direct impact, do you feel, or is it more, I guess, how the candidate, is it more Democrat, Republican, or is it almost the candidate that is, I guess, representing that party?
Yeah, that's kind of a tricky thing, and it's not always easy to parse out whether or not that they're attracted to a party per se versus the particular candidate. My suspicion is it's probably both, but it probably is a good deal the party too. So there's definitely some evidence that Ronald Reagan was popular among younger voters in the 80s, but it would be, as Barack Obama in 2008 was popular among younger voters, but it would be a mistake to say Barack Obama is the reason that you get more support for Democrats among younger voters in recent elections, because younger voters were also more supportive of John Kerry. And it was not, he didn't have the sort of media image that Barack Obama had that seemed to lend itself more directly to the notion of change and hope and those sorts of things.
Right. What percentage would you say, of the 18 to 24, 25 to 29, of those citizens, how many actually do you think go out and vote?
Not very many. When I say that, I mean relative to other age groups. So this is the other sort of perception of young voters, especially among the segment of that age group who are interested and active in politics. Every election cycle, there's this sort of hope of, well, if we can just galvanize, young voters, we can impact the election. Because there are a lot of young people. Just in 2008, for example, there were 16 million new eligible voters based on age alone, right? That's not including people who were naturalized or whatnot, but just on kids, American citizens who became age eligible to vote. That's 16 million more people who could have participated. And so it seems, that's a lot. Given that 130 million people voted, that's 7-8% or more. So you can, so you so it looks like, this could be a big impact on elections, but it rarely is. And the reason that the youth voter rarely has a big impact on elections is because younger Americans just typically don't turn out in nearly the same numbers as older Americans. In fact, 18 to 24-year-olds are among all age groups they're the least likely to turn out. If you expand the age group from 18 to 29, it's still the least likely to turn out. In fact, for presidential elections, it varies a little bit by election to election, but you're usually looking at a turnout rate about 20 to 30 points less than among the general population as a whole. So it's not real high. You're looking in the range of about 40 to 50% of young voters that actually turn out to vote in presidential elections. If you look at Senate and governor, it's even lower.
Would you say, with the amount of people going to college now, would you say that has a direct impact? Like, I know I'm out of state, so I am not fully educated about how to fill out an absentee ballot. Would you give credit to that? People just not being knowledgeable about it.
I think that's the big part of it. The reason that it's not surprising that younger Americans vote less is because they face sort of a different cost benefit when it comes to voting. Now there will be some people that tell you, or would like to tell a story where the fault, if you will, of younger Americans for not voting is because the parties and the candidates don't speak to them. And there may be some truth to that. In fact, there is some evidence that in the last decade or two, the parties and the candidates have made less of an effort to contact younger voters. So there's less of an effort to try to mobilize them directly that way. Maybe new media, social media will change that. The bigger issue is less about what the candidates are doing. It's more about the situations younger Americans find themselves in, like yours. So if you're a younger voter, you tend to be more mobile, or if you're a younger American, you tend to be more mobile, which means that if you're like you, if you're from out of state and you're now in Oxford, okay, now you have to do one of a few things. You have to decide to register here, so now you have to go find how to do that, and then register here, so then now you can be a registered voter in Mississippi, and then you have to find a new polling place, wherever that would be in Oxford. So there's extra costs you have to face. Or you decide to vote absentee back in your home state. Those rules aren't always clear. The timelines aren't always easy to follow. It's not always convenient. So those are two extra inconveniences that younger Americans, particularly younger Americans in college, face that older Americans don't. On the benefit side, younger Americans just tend to not be as directly connected in obvious ways. I mean, there certainly are many ways that politics and government affects the lives of younger Americans, but it's not always clear and obvious ways. So for instance, I am old, I'm in my 30s, right? So I have a residence that I've lived in for a few years. I pay property taxes, right? So now that's a direct, government connection to my life. I have kids that are going to be going to public school, right? So I'm paying attention to those kinds of issues because they have a direct impact on my life. When you're 20 years old, those things just aren't as obvious, and so they don't necessarily enter into the thinking. And when you throw in the extra inconveniences of where do I vote? Do I need to register here? Do I need to do this absentee? It's really not surprising that younger Americans vote less.
Awesome. I definitely understand that. Thank you. Do you think there will be an increase in the youth vote in this election compared to the last one, maybe years prior?
No, I don't think so. And the reason is because it's been pretty stable. We get a little bit of a fluctuation from presidential election to presidential election, but it's usually in the range of a few percentage points. 2008 is often seen as sort of a youth election, but in all honesty, 2008, the rate of 18 to 24-year-olds who voted wasn't really that much higher than in 2004 or even 2000. Now, both 2004 and 2008 were a little bit higher than the 90s, but it's not some catastrophic difference. And even with those little bit bumps, 2008 younger voters were still the least likely age group to vote. So my guess is it's going to be, since this has been pretty stable in the past, with a little bit of bouncing around, my guess it's going to be follow the same trend.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time, Dr. Henderson.
No problem. Happy to do it.